Okay, so my name's Tom Clark, and kind of interesting, when I was sworn in as president, I was working for Dave Shea at Shea Construction, and then in March of that year, I left Shea Construction and formed my company in April of '98. So kind of a funny story that I tell is I went to Washington, D.C. to represent the AGC, as the presidents did back then, and went to the meeting, and they had a get-together dinner, and I was by myself, and this gentleman, they want to take a picture as you get on this boat, and so this gentleman steps up and said, well, you can have a picture with me, and it was the president of Bechtel. And so at that time there was a contractor from Spokane that didn't have a job and didn't even hardly have a company, standing with the president of Bechtel. So that's kind of the breadth of the AGC. You know, that I think Joe Lavernier was president when I was vice president, then I was president, and then I think Eric Brown followed me, and Lonnie Cargyle was there. And trying to remember the rest of the board members, it's been a while. Well, I think when I was president, there was kind of a rift between the AGC of Washington and the Inland AGC. And a man by the name of Frank Fermani was president when I was president. Frank was a really great guy, owned Charter Construction over in Seattle. He came over for our banquet, our annual meeting, and he and I sat down, and he brought it up, and I had it on my mind too, and he says, hey, why don't we just get along? And let's get our executive directors can go have a boxing match wherever they want to have it, and let's you and I get along. And from then on, he and I became great friends, and he helped me a lot as I was starting my company. And through that process, the AGC of Washington was just starting the group retro program, and we wanted to be involved in it. And there was some, again, politics going on between directors and one thing and another. And Frank and I shook hands, and that's how we got involved in the group retro program, which has been pretty successful for both sides, both AGCs, and been a source of income for the AGC for a long time. So that's probably the biggest thing that happened during my tenure, and I'm most proud of. Yeah, I think that was my biggest goal, was to try and work with the AGC of Washington. I mean, the reality was, and is, they're kind of the big dog on the porch. And so why don't we work with them and take advantage of what they have going on and try and augment it, as opposed to recreate it over here on a smaller scale. And that led into, having more of a joint presence in Olympia. Of course, the group retro thing was the biggest deal. Well, I think anytime you go to the national conventions, that's a big effect. If you're a general contractor or a contractor in general, going to the national convention just really shows you what a big industry this is and how many people are in it, and gives you a big sense of pride. So national conventions are a highlight, obviously. We went up, and I don't know if it was when I was president, but somewhere in that, either president or past president, we went up to Alaska and had a meeting up in Anchorage. And they had a director up there at the time, and I can't remember this guy's name, but he was a character. And we went to his house, and they did things different in Alaska, and they were less than politically correct, and the protocols were completely different down here in the lower 48, but that was pretty memorable. I remember Lonnie Cargyle was with me on that trip, yeah. I think we were okay. I don't think it was booming, but in '98, I think things were pretty stable. Again, I was just starting out as a contractor and on my own, and I remember scrapping for work, but there were opportunities, so it must have been pretty well. I don't remember suffering. So. they were helpful, and I think we were kind of at the end of Ken Dunham's time here. He had become very politically active in Olympia and wasn't around here very much, and spent a lot of time on the road and a lot of time traveling back and forth to Olympia. John Sander was here. He was very helpful. I think they were supportive in the endeavors that we were trying to do. Well, I was born and raised in Libby, Montana, and born and raised in the logging industry. My dad wasn't a logger, but everybody in Libby was a logger pretty much. And so I went to Montana State to become a surveyor so I could go back and build logging roads is what I wanted to do. And that was in 1977, and the economy went in the tank, and the logging industry was in trouble. And a very close friend of ours and our family, I went and talked to Bob, and he said, don't hook your wagon to the logging industry. It's the wrong place to be. And so I kind of looked, and there was a company that came out of Des Moines, Iowa, called the Whites Company. Came to Bozeman to go skiing one winter and write the trip off to interview some college kids, and they hired about 3 or 4 of us. So ended up going to Des Moines, worked for the Whites Company, ended up down in Florida, worked for them for a couple of years, decided it was time to come back to the Northwest. Came back up here, started knocking on doors. A friend of mine at the time worked for Bernie Lavernier and Dave Shea. They were looking for a field engineer to build a fish hatchery down in Lyons Ferry Fish Hatchery. So my wife and I went down and lived in Dayton for a couple of years, worked for Bernie and Dave, came back up. And about the time I came back into Spokane, that firm split and became Lavernier Construction. And Shea Construction. It was kind of a no-brainer which way to go for me, so I went with Dave and spent about 10 years there or so, and then decided it was time to do my own thing in 98. Started T.W. Clark Construction in 98. And then about 2010 or so, I thought maybe I should start thinking about what the future's going to hold. Had a good guy working for me that was interested in ownership, and transferred the ownership to him. And so I've been retired and out of the business since 17. Oh, we did a lot of retail business over on the coast with a family called Hagen, which was a big grocer on the coast. We probably built 20 of their grocery stores over a period of 20 years. We built. In 2006, we went down to Sun Valley, Idaho, and built a condominium down there, right just as the economy was dying. And that was a significant project. It was about a $20 million condominium, and of course, the economy died. The guy didn't have lost his financing. It was one of those hair-raising projects. We came out of it just fine, but that was probably one of the most challenging projects, both technically because it was a post-tension deck building, and also management-wise because we went through, I think, 6 construction managers and 2 banks. It was one of those projects. Well, I'm old enough to say that I remember when fax machines came on board. So the technology obviously is the biggest change. When we first went down to Des Moines and went to work for Fred White's, who at the time was a $250 million contractor. Walked in and looked at the computer that ran that company. It was in a room about twice the size of this room, and barely added, divided, multiplied, and subtracted. Now everything's computerized. I think that's a big part of it. I think the communication, through all the various media has changed significantly. Instantaneous communication, instantaneous interaction with design teams, owners, what have you. And that's a double-edged sword. I think we get tied up in the communication and lose track of the solution at times, is what I saw toward the, now. But definitely technology is the biggest change. Well, I think belonging to your trade organization, irregardless of your, what you do for a living, is very important. And if you're going to belong to a trade organization, you want to belong to the most prestigious, the right one, right? The AGC is a prestigious national powerhouse. So when I started my company, I definitely, even though I didn't have any money because I was starting a construction company, one of the important things to do was to belong to the AGC. I was exposed to the AGC through my previous employers who were also strong AGC supporters. We're the AGC.